Remy Reig. Díomh agus fáilte roisteach go dtí an cruinniú seo an tarna cruinniú pebliad an bhliain seo agus is dócha an cruinniú eisceachtúla bhí going up bunaíoch an túdras ceir go le bliana hin. You're very welcome to this meeting of the Policing Authority with the Commissioner and his colleagues held in public. Held in public in extraordinary circumstances and in a way that is a first, where everybody present is in a different location. And we hope that the same energy that has always attended these public meetings will also attend this one. These, as I said, are extraordinary times, and they have called for extraordinary responses. And the first thing that I want to say is to express in this public meeting to the Commissioner and his colleagues, as we have done publicly before and in writing, the appreciation of the authority and our warm commendation for the engagement of members and staff of the Garda Síochána throughout the country in dealing with this particular issue and in the often innovative methods that have been used as part of the community engagement to help preserve public safety and to focus on the importance of this public health emergency and to be of assistance and support to the most vulnerable in our communities. And these extraordinary times have also evoked a response in terms of the additional powers that have been given to the Gardaí, powers that nobody could conceivably have envisaged a few short weeks ago, but they are now part of the statutory infrastructure of the state, at least for a number of months. And the responsibility has been placed on the Gardaí to exercise those powers that have been given to them in this context. And the authority, for its part, also has additional responsibilities in terms of the way that it oversees the discharge of these powers and in the way that it ensures that the public interest is served by the open accountability of the Garda Síochána through the oversight of the authority for the exercise of these powers. And moreover, the Minister for Justice and Equality has charged the authority with reporting regularly to him on that oversight and on the consistent application of the new statutory powers across the country and on the extent to which they are affecting vulnerable people. This we did in a first interim report last week, and our next report will be submitted to the Minister a week from today on the 6th of May. And this meeting today will give us the opportunity, members of the authority, to engage with the Commissioner and his colleagues on some of these issues and give the Commissioner an opportunity to present to the public his views and responses and comments on these issues. But in addition, while these special circumstances are with us, normal life goes on, normal policing work goes on, and I think it's right and appropriate that we should, as our first agenda item as usual, deal with the Commissioner's monthly report, important opportunity for the Commissioner and for the public, because this is a published document, to engage with the wide range of activities within Garda Síochána. And Debbie Donnelly is going to introduce our lead on these questions. Debbie.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Commissioner and colleagues. I wanted to start off by just reflecting a little bit on what we've seen in terms of the engagement that you have with the public and the tremendous stories that we see through your social media and in the other media as well. and reflect on that as the important public confidence in building that public confidence in policing that we also desire. But there was a couple of those stories that particularly struck me. One was the little boy's birthday in Cork, where there was sort of a concerted effort to give him that sort of celebration. And the second was Garda Gardner in Tralee, where she garnished all of the local community to have, I would say, a bit of crack. But I suppose behind all of that fun, there is an important point there about the public confidence, about that role that Garda have in that sort of community cohesion. And Commissioner, I just want to ask your reflections on that, your experience and the feedback that you're getting from local guards on that community engagement and the feedback that you're getting from communities.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Debbie. Really, one has to go back to the week beginning, I think it's the 8th of March, 8th, 9th of March, that period where we set out our course in respect of how we would approach the policing of this particular emergency and indeed unparalleled situation. And one of the things which was very clear to us all, but particularly when we looked at the experience of policing in the rest of Europe, is that it was essential to maintain the close contact with the community. We pride ourselves in being very much a community-based organisation, and now this was the opportunity when really we should be starting to play to that strength. And beyond what you see on Twitter and the social media, and sometimes on the news, on a daily basis, we've resourced the organisation so they're able to engage in effect, in community support, community reassurance type activities. In many of our divisions, I would say anybody who's in any way isolated or vulnerable has had a personal interaction with a member of Garda Síochána, indeed, calling to their door to make sure they're okay, see what help they need, see if we can help them, or to see if some other agency should be available to help them as well. And I think that's probably pretty unique right across, certainly in these islands and perhaps across Europe, to put such an emphasis in making a personal contact and speaking to people face to face. And it's been a real for us in terms of community confidence and community support. And it's in against that context then that we commenced our role in terms of initially assisting in terms of informing the public, and the 3 E's of engaging, educating and encouraging compliance with the restrictions, which then commenced in around the end of March, and that went on for about 10 days. And that set then, I think, the base, the foundation, those collectively set the foundation now for the enforcement work that we're engaged in. And again, we're still very much wedded to a graduated response as the legislation sets out, but also then maximum use of discretion and common sense in terms of approaching the public and their compliance with the regulations. And indeed, enforcement has been used very much as a last resort. But I think we're on the right tack with this. I think this is important for confidence in the organisation now, but also this will leave a lasting impression. And we're very much determined to do our best for the community and be there for them, not just from an enforcement or regulatory point of view, but also there to support many people who at this time are obviously concerned, and indeed regrettably many people are now find themselves in a position of grieving for loved ones.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. And tell me, to what extent is the organisation enabling this, I suppose, the furtherance and the development of the diversity strategy through that community engagement? And can you give us some examples of where you have undertaken that with any particular groups through engaging with them on COVID?
Yes, yes, thank you. A particular group which there's been a lot of interaction both through headquarters, but also at the divisional level, has been with the traveller community, and firstly, in terms of right at the start of this, about the explanation of the restrictions and then the regulations, and explanation as to what that would look like, and the restrictions then are placed on all of society, and that has been very successful. We've been able to negotiate our way through a whole series of situations and negotiate our way through those successfully, and I hope at the far end of this we'll have developed a richer, deeper, and very positive relationship with the traveller community, because we've dealt with these things with great tact and discretion with them, and I think that's been self-evident in terms of some of the operations we've engaged in, again around things which people hold very dear, be it wakes or funerals in particular.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner. I'd like to move on then to talk to you about the use of the mobility devices. Can you just confirm how many now are being used and what they're being used for?
Well, there's over 3,000 of these devices now on issue, and it's an additional string to our bow, particularly at the time, because it allows members who have possession of them to access their email, to access obviously that remotely, to communicate with their colleagues, but also then an invaluable tool at the side of the road in terms of the other features they have for identification of driving license, driving offences such as disqualified driving, and indeed no insurance. And they've been to the front in terms of enforcement during this period as well. So the mobility keeps on developing, but one of the important elements has just been the connectivity and the individual connectivity, and that's been important in terms of managing social distancing within the organisation and minimising time people are spending at keyboards, in effect, in stations, and at a degree of risk as compared with having a handheld device. But if I just looked at Andrew, is there any other points you wish to raise in respect of that, Andrew?
No, I covered it there, Commissioner. I mean, the key point, I suppose, has been the way that we've accelerated our rollout of the devices to directly assist in COVID-19. And while it's 3,000 of the larger devices, the Galaxy Note 10s that have been rolled out, the small notebooks in effect, there's another 1,500 smaller phones with the same functionality that have also been rolled out. So we're very much focused on mobility as part of social distancing, but also to support COVID operations. Commissioners, that's a very accelerated rollout compared to what we planned earlier in the year. We're probably running about twice the level we planned for this point of the year.
Okay, thank you. And I look forward to other conversations with you about the developing use of these devices. Can I move on then to talk very briefly about crime trends? And generally it's down, I suppose not unexpectedly, across many. We have significant increases, although reported on crimes such as domestic violence. We have an increase in criminal damage. But just on the domestic violence, and I think other colleagues will speak to later about some of the detail on that. I just wonder if it would be possible, Commissioner, to, in your future monthly reports, to reflect what the trends are on domestic violence and other crimes such as fraud that may be particularly affected at the moment on these circumstances. And also if you could say something in relation to criminal damage, what do you believe is happening there in terms of the trend and what your response is likely to be? Thank you.
May I ask Deb which page you're looking at in terms of criminal damage? I have a decreasing trend here, and when I look at the 5-year average, it seems to be going the right way. Okay. Well, I'll deal with the other issues then. In terms of domestic abuse.
Sorry, Commissioner. I was just trying to get to the detail of that. Maybe I misspoke on that, but I thought I'd seen it going up. But anyway.
Well, it is showing a slight rise in February, but I think our experience from March and onwards here is of one of so crimes of theft, burglary, criminal damage. They are diminishing. The areas where we're seeing increase, well, one you've referred to them, domestic abuse. Secondly, then there's been an increase in terms of possession of drugs, possession of offensive weapons, and also then fraud. And we think there's significant attempts around fraud, defrauding institutions, indeed even trying to defraud governments and in big government procurement operations, but also then defrauding individuals as well. So this seems to be a particularly vulnerable time in respect of this, and criminals are making a huge effort at this time of uncertainty to further online and fraud and cyber attacks on various institutions. So that is of concern itself. I think our presence around is leading to an increase in some of the detections around possession of drugs, possession of offensive weapons. Our detections for drink and drug driving are almost where they were last year at the same time. And given the decrease there is in road traffic, that's again a significant testament to how proactive we are, particularly in the evening and nighttime. And domestic abuse is showing a worrying increase on last year. Probably it's features in around 21% at this time, but we are specifically going to go out with information and provide information publicly in respect of that. And we're in negotiations with the CSO in respect of that. So we'll be talking more about that, but undoubtedly we can add more detail into the next monthly report in respect of that. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. And the page number is 19. There is a little uplift on the criminal damage just there. If I could just ask, I suppose, one more question, and it's around ICT and the detailed reforms that you have in place and the impact that some of the decisions and prioritisation that you may have to make on some of the major programmes may have on the operation of An Garda Síochána, and also ask you about the ICT implementation plan, and we do look forward to receiving that.
Well, probably we'll get to it in the agenda, but we've had to re-examine our own policing plan for the year. We are in certain assumptions within that, but one of the impacts is going to be in respect of ICT, and then how we reprioritise what we're doing and indeed what resources we are left with to carry on with our ICT strategy. But there's some areas that we do want to continue the work on. The RDMS system is one in particular, because it would be an invaluable tool just given the scale of the deployment that we have at this moment in time. Sorry, excuse me. But we've made some assumptions in terms of just getting towards a more normalised operating environment in the third quarter of the year, and also then that our funding streams are going to be resilient, and we've no information to suggest otherwise. But at the same time, one has to be realistic and just the financial scenario that the country's going to face when we come out of the far end of this. And the ICT implementation plan is presently being worked up. And I'd look to Andrew. Is there any further detail you want to provide there in respect of that, please?
Well, just a couple of comments, Commissioner. So first was the impact on ICT operations. It has changed, obviously, to focus on supporting the organisation through COVID-19 and the changing nature of work. that we have very much pushed from what was primarily a site-based organization previously to now very much a remote-based organization. And in many organizations, we're looking at 80% plus of employees are working remotely. So that's mainly for Garda staff or for Gardaí. And then on the flip side, as we touched on earlier on, we're rolling out mobility solutions for guards that are working out of sites. So that's obviously involved quite a big change in our infrastructure in order to be able to support that. That's been our priority over the last number of weeks. We're now, I suppose, getting back into the normal rollout of systems, having established that way of working for our large sites. So as the Commissioner said, RDMS is a priority. Definitely Pulse is also a priority. So for example, Pulse 751 was due to go out in the middle of April. It's been delayed by approximately 3 weeks, but will still go out, and we're intending that Pulse 7.6 will go out on schedule as well. And some of those systems have very important releases and milestones to support data quality, to support the introduction of air codes, and other very important functionality. There's other aspects, I suppose, where we have systems that are developed in partnership with other agencies and with the European Union. So, for example, the Schengen Information System, which was a major part of our rollout this year, for understandable reasons, the EU has delayed our onboarding or our rollout onto that system. So I suppose we've had a period of disruption for about 6 weeks or so, but within the next couple of weeks, we'll probably resume to a kind of a normal throughput and resuming with normal development and release of technology solutions. But obviously, there's been a cost involved. We're still assessing what that is, and that will have to be made up over the course of the year. As far as the ICT implementation plan goes, we have currently about 100 active projects. Those projects are being tracked in a sort of an agile fashion, and that's proven very useful to us in order to be able to switch, temporarily suspend some of those projects and then to pick them back up again in order to be able to deal with COVID-19. So every one of those projects is tracked. It has milestones associated with it, and we'll be certainly happy to share more detail about that. But we're actively working on on the implementation of the projects that were and systems that were committed for 2020.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for all of those answers. And I guess it would be remiss of me at this point not to recognise the successes you had in relation to disruption of organised crime and the different gangs. I don't know, Commissioner, if you want to take an opportunity to reflect on any of those.
Well, I think there's a couple of important elements there. We maintained our national detective capability because we were fearful around organised crime gangs and what they may attempt at this time, and seeing perhaps as a time of vulnerability. And as a result then, plus then, I would say again, because of our very prominent presence and proactive presence out in the ground, we've had a lot of success, and over recent weeks, we've seized very significant amounts of cannabis and cocaine, seized ammunition, we've seized firearms, and we've seized cash, and also then made important arrests, and files have been submitted to the DPP in respect of for instance, drugs intimidation. So there's been, we have not taken the eye off the ball in terms of the OCG groups. We were fearful, as I said, that they would use this opportunity. We've kept a focus on them, and I think that's borne fruit. We have also seen tragedy with 3 young people succumbing to what is suspected to be a cocktail of drugs between prescription, counterfeit, and perhaps illicit drugs. That's still under investigation. But that, in part, is illustrative of just the drugs market and what's happening out there as people try and fulfill demand and trying to maintain supply, and the switch then perhaps to postal services, postal routes to get supplies of drugs moving in the country. But we're not taking the eye off the ball, and we remain very vigilant and proactive. We certainly continue our intelligence gathering operations against OCGs and our proactive investigative operations as well. They are a bunch who are just a dead weight and indeed a cancer to society, and we're very determined to bring as many of them to justice as possible and to make Ireland a very difficult place for them to operate. And we're using this opportunity when we have resources on the ground just to hammer home that as well, to reassert ourselves in terms of community policing in some of the more difficult areas where these gangs would suggest that they hold sway. This has given us a good opportunity to reconnect with the community in some of the critical areas where these gangs would try and exert influence as well. And we've taken the opportunity of resources that we have to do that as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chair, that's all my questions on the monthly report.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Commissioner. Let me say at this stage, as I did at the beginning of our earlier meeting that we had in private, a word of welcome to Deputy Commissioner McMahon, who is attending her first, not her first meeting of the authority in public, but her first in her new capacity. So you're welcome, and good wishes in your period in that position as you're acting as Deputy Commissioner. The focus of most of the rest of the public meeting will be on various issues arising from the health emergency and the statutory measures that were introduced as a consequence thereof, and on the role of the Garda Síochána in policing that and in responding to it. And Dr. Vicky Conway is going to lead on this session.
Thanks very much, Chair. Commissioner, there is 5 powers afforded to the Gardaí under the new legislation: power to direct compliance, to arrest for failure to comply, power to require a name and address, to arrest for failure to comply with that request, or to arrest for failure to comply with regulations. The authority notes the very exceptional nature of these powers. 6 months ago, it was unimaginable that a guard could have directed you to go home because you were going for a walk 3 kilometres from your house. And the powers obviously have potential to interfere with rights to liberty, to silence, assembly, association, and even family life. There's very real national importance behind these powers, but as the overseers of policing, it's the job of the policing authority to oversee how they're being used. To that end, we very much appreciate your clear statement that enforcement should always be a last resort. And our focus will be on ensuring that the exceptional powers, when they are used, are being used fairly, respectfully, in ways that comply with human rights. I think in order for us to do that, we do have to have as much information as possible about the use of the powers. So far, we've received numbers relating to arrests, but that's just 3 of the 5 powers that have been granted. The authority is clear that the Minister has asked for use of any of the powers to be recorded. And we believe this information is important for your organisation, for us to comply with our oversight functions. It's also of huge public importance for the public health crisis and for confidence in policing. So we're of the view that you've been given this quite exceptional power to direct people to go home or to move in order to comply with regulations. And we believe you should be able to account to us and to the public for the use of that power. So we would like to ask you to provide us with data relating to use of all of the powers under the legislation.
Thank you. We've had discussions in respect of this matter, in fact, quite extensive discussions. And so in the private session, we were able to talk through maybe some other solutions in respect of that. I think it would be important for me just to set in perspective that we've had 76 enforcement actions. Ultimately, those have ended up in arrest scenarios. But we have many interactions then, obviously, with the public. I think the great majority of the public are compliant. Where we're using the enforcement powers, these are very rare occasions, and indeed, actually, legislation and I think the proper interpretation of legislation is that a member of the public should be given the opportunity to, in fact, become compliant, to actually comply with a request or direction, as the legislation says, a member of Garda Síochána, and become compliant, and therefore then no offence is actually is actually committed by that individual. And so we see just a whole variety of situations. I've made it very clear to the organisation that they need to use a maximum use of, in effect, their discretion and common sense with dealing with people, because we are using and have available to us extraordinary powers. We're in pretty much uncharted waters as to the overall long-term impact of having these powers as well. And we're very mindful that we have very wide responsibilities beyond just the policing of this health emergency, and we must at all times work to promote public confidence in Garda Síochána. So there was various suggestions during a private session, and what I would suggest is that I would take those away. I would still have a couple of factors that we just need to work through. Is one, how we ensure our figures are accurate and can be subject to verification, because as you say, these are important statistics. And secondly, then, that we don't actually inadvertently change the nature of the operation that we are engaged in. There's a huge amount of support for what we're doing, and I've received nothing but compliments, in fact, for the manner in which members of Garda Síochána are conducting themselves out on the ground, but also then in terms of the community work we're also doing at the same time. So again, I'd be very careful about what we do doesn't have an impact on that, but in between those two goalposts, then there's probably a set of solutions that we can look towards. But to give some idea of the scale, last week we engaged in more than 10,000 checkpoints throughout the country, and those would vary from main roads right down to secondary roads, and in the end we ended up with 37 enforcement actions, and not all of those would have been at vehicle checkpoints either. So it gives an illustration of how sparingly we are using our enforcement powers. And I think that contrasts very favorably right across Europe, not just in terms of, well, not really about our approach, but actually about how compliant society is in living within these restrictions. These restrictions are difficult, requires a good deal of self-discipline, and by and large, our experience is people are living with that self-discipline and living within the spirit of the restrictions and the letter of the regulations. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. I think we'd agree that it's great to see that the numbers of arrests are so low, but that's just one form of enforcement. The direction to comply is also a form of enforcement. And in fact, a lot of European countries haven't actually been given additional arrest powers under their equivalent legislation. They have alternatives like fixed charge penalties. So, you know, in terms of comparison, it's actually really important for us to have that other set of data so that we can do that. But yes, I mean, the authority is clear that it wants to receive this data so that we can oversee and monitor properly. But I'll move on for now and we can explore those possibilities further. I guess a supplementary question is, how is it being ensured that the powers are being used in a human rights compliant manner? And I suppose the obvious concern that arises for us would be the potential, given the discretionary nature, for these powers to be used in a discriminatory way, whether that's on the basis of somebody's gender, age, socioeconomic background, ethnicity, the fact that they have historical interactions with the Gardaí. So I'd like to know, how do you assure yourself that these are being used in a human rights compliant manner?
Well, we've put a huge emphasis in terms of the messaging that we've done to the organisation about the nature of the operation that we are engaged in. But I have to say the nature of 31A7 is that if people comply, they haven't committed an offence, and therefore then there's no policing purpose for us to record name and address or any of the details that you suggest. So that is actually a blank spot in terms of our knowledge of what the use of 31A7 is. I'm not sure that I entirely agree that that is enforcement, because we are using 4 E's of our approach, which is around also then educate and encourage people. And a lot of this has been done in just and I would say a very common sense and full of discretion and courtesy towards the public. But we have no then right or entitlement then to start to record information where people in law have not committed an offence. We have data, very obviously data, in respect of the 76 that we've dealt with. That is a very small subset and a very small set from which to determine really anything from, because just the numbers are so small. So there is a difficulty, because the legislation is very specific about this being in effect a graduated response, and that we take a graduated response as defined in the legislation. I think the legislation is almost unique in that if somebody complies, then there's no offence disclosed. There's no offence disclosed, then we have no policing purpose for them recording detail, and that is my understanding of the situation. Thank you.
I'm not seeking for you to record details where powers are not being used. I guess I'm just wondering, how do you ensure to yourself as the Commissioner with the Section 42 public duty to comply with human rights that the powers are being used in a non-discriminatory way? For instance, have you undertaken a mapping of the use of the powers? What instructions have been given to people that, around certain factors that may not be taken into account when you're using these powers? I'm wondering about those kind of processes and what has been done.
Well, I would point to the fact that, yes, we can map exactly where the checkpoints have been, and we can give illustration of the full geographic spread of the checkpoints. But beyond that, then, in terms of patrolling patterns, etc., we've had a strong presence right throughout the whole country, and people are seeing, guards for the first time in years. And then, secondly, I would point out to the approach that we've had, and I would highlight again the approach that we've had in respect of the traveller groups, where we met their specific concerns and their specific needs in light of the requirement of the regulations and the restrictions. But I'd also point to the public sentiment that there is in respect of the use of the powers, and the strong public support messages of support that we're getting. I don't think any issues have been that have arose at all in terms of how we've used these powers, and just a very positive feedback that I've had and that members of the organisation would have. Then beyond that, then there is a very strong command and control in respect of this, and that is daily command and control in terms of ourselves here in Phoenix Park, and that spreads out then to the operational ACs and down into the various divisional officers and department and branch heads. So we have a very firm grip on this operation. We know precisely what's happening from day to day and what the specific issues are, and therefore then what our approach would be. But within all of this, we very much avoided the enforcement piece. We've at all times tried to firstly move to negotiation and avoid enforcement at all. And again, it's illustrative of the extraordinary powers that we're given, and to make sure that we are not being seen to be overzealous in their use, or indeed let them creep into other forms of policing.
Yeah, I should clarify, we're not suggesting that these powers are being used in a discriminatory way. We don't have a basis for saying that. And as you say, we've had our own interactions with conducting our own engagements with groups such as Pavy Point, who have been very complimentary about the tactical way in which Garda Síochána has engaged with them, particularly around issues like funerals and wakes, as you've mentioned, which is really, really encouraging. Other groups, however, ICCL have indicated that they've received reports that COVID stops, as it were being used to conduct stop and searches, looking in bags at purchases and so on. Has it been made clear to members that the right to privacy would mean that the current regulations do not provide a right to search belongings in such instances?
Well, no, look, precisely. There's no associated power to examine somebody's shopping. So I haven't. This was raised with me yesterday. That's the first report I received of anything remotely like that. But I think it's inaccurate to talk that these are COVID-19 checkpoints. These are policing checkpoints. Part of that is around their COVID-19 restrictions, but if we are performing the policing task of doing a checkpoint, then we're there to police in effect, the full canon of the legislation. And so if other offences become apparent or disclosed, we're there to deal with those. So of the 76 enforcements there's been in respect of COVID-19, we would have a further 760 that have identified things such as drunk or drug driving, possession of drugs, possession of offensive weapons, and other such other public order type offences. So not a police service for COVID-19, we're a police service, and part of the responsibilities that we have is managing this, helping to manage and supporting the government effort in terms of management of COVID-19.
No, I appreciate that entirely, and the other offences that have been identified, that is encouraging, particularly given the increase we've seen around road traffic fatalities of late in particular. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is what particular directions have been given to the organisation around human rights and how human rights issues arise in relation to the current situation.
Well, human rights was specifically referenced in the direction that went out to the organisation, and so we can provide a copy of that to the authority then, and that would give the direction that was provided. But I would add to that then just our experience of actually the operational use of this and the supervision of it has added then in terms of making sure that our own decision-making model, which takes into account both human rights, the code of ethics, has applied to our decision-making process. And indeed, actually, the decision-making model takes us to a place of maximising our discretion in respect of this, and that's what we've done.
Yeah, the authority, in fact, has already seen that document, and I suppose that's why I was asking the question, because our position was that that document was not as detailed on human rights and as clear to members about the human rights issues arising as we might have hoped. And I think there is some scope for that to be enhanced. But I'll move on. Can you explain to us the circumstances in which it has been deemed appropriate to have armed police supporting checkpoints and on patrol in the current crisis?
Well, in part, this is our normal operating environment. Detectives or who are routinely armed, or the armed support unit, have been supporting checkpoints, and this is about maximising our visibility on the ground and the impact then of any of our operations. It's coincidentally that they are armed. They're carrying sidearms as part of their operational equipment, and they would be wearing their body armour. They're wearing a jacket which clearly identifies them as members of Garda Commissioner, and obviously then they are with other uniformed members of Garda. But this is all part just of the policing effort, and I don't think much more should be read into it than that. These are resources that we have, and we are deploying these divisional resources then appropriately for this operation.
And I know this was mentioned already in the private meeting, but I think it's important to raise it here about the question of the extent to which you appreciate they are acting as a support to the performance of functions. But is there a degree to which, by carrying arms in that context, it's somewhat incompatible with the message that is quite strongly being portrayed about this being a law enforcement operation, or prioritising non-enforcement? Well,
probably what I said earlier in respect of this isn't just solely about COVID-19. We still have the full gambit and full policing responsibilities. In parts, and it's been reported in the amount of seizures we've made in respect of drugs, the amount of interceptions we've had of organised crime groups. Some of those have been in terms of the routine or the vehicle checkpoints that we've put out as part of this operation. But when we put individuals out to a checkpoint, they can expect to have to deal with anything that comes along. They're just not there solely for COVID-19. And the deployment of detectives gives us an additional resource in terms of our visibility and the scale of some of the checkpoints that we can take on. And indeed then they will have their own local knowledge and a very valuable addition in terms of identifying those who may be on the road for other purposes, and we've had certainly cases where we've identified habitual burglars, for instance, who've been on the road through the use of detectives and checkpoints. So it's proved that from a policing perspective, and as I say, these detectives, as part of their routine patrol equipment, that they would carry sidearms.
I'd be slightly concerned though that argument could be used in any circumstance, an ordinary circumstance, to justify armed police at routine checkpoints. I don't think anyone, the guards or the public, wants to see routinization of armed police at checkpoints.
No, but at the same time, the reality is that we have a very, very violent subset of individuals who engage in organised crime and will use full range of force available to them. And we are expected and do protect society, and it is our duty to protect society from them. And in doing so, we have detectives who are armed, but we also have our armed support unit. The armed support unit is obviously also a very overt response that we would call upon. And regrettably, being armed or having elements of the organisation being armed is the reality of a modern day policing service. But we are fortunate that we are not routinely armed, in that the majority of the organisation does not carry a firearm or sidearm.
Okay. Could you explain the decision that's been made to introduce the use of anti-spit hoods? I guess I'm wondering what evidence supported that their ability to reduce instances of transmission, and whether PPE would not have been preferable?
This is a further extension of protective equipment, not just for ourselves, but also for members of the public. Regrettably, start of really this emergency, it became clear that people were using the threat of spitting either to spit at members of Garda Commissioner or indeed spit at members of the public. And it was with reluctance that we introduced anti-spit hoods, but they are obviously then to protect members of Garda Commissioner in arrest type situations, or indeed members of the public, where you have individuals who insist on, after warning, continue to spit or threaten to spit at ourselves or members of the public. Now, it being spat on at any time is a disgusting thing. At this time, it involves the risk of the transmission of disease. We see individuals who deliberately bite the inside of their mouth, their tongue, or their lip, so that not only are they spitting saliva, they're spitting blood, and these are dangerous situations because it risks the spread of COVID-19. We also then, in those circumstances, arresting members will have access to protective equipment. We've introduced the face visors that one will have seen, the full face visors, and we've also COVID-19 vehicles on available in every division, which will have full range of protective equipment. So we do get pains to avoid the use of them. They are seen though as a use of force, but they're use of force within a protective equipment scenario.
Okay, I think it's firstly, we do absolutely acknowledge the extent of the danger of the situation that Gardaí are faced with in those contexts, but we're also pleased to hear you describe it as a use of force, and that it's one you wish to avoid where possible. Could you indicate to us the nature of the training for this, given obviously the difficulties that exist at present in providing training?
If I just add one other point as well, this will be subject to review on the 1st of September as well. I think we haven't introduced these in effect as settled pieces of personal protective equipment to the organisation. The only training that we were able to provide for, given just that where we are in terms of social distance, etc., was we provided video training and then explanation, and individuals who are issued with an anti-spit guard have to undergo this training, which includes video training, but secondly then must also have signed the code of ethics. So we have, they're not on personal issues as such, and they are in effect are signed before individuals go on duty. So there is a check as to who has possession of them, and indeed then the recent graduates from the police college did not actually receive the anti-spit guards as well.
Okay, thank you. And I know the authority has mentioned in its report to the Minister, and you might like to comment on it here, that the authority's position is that we'd rather they were not used on children aged 12 to 18, given the various vulnerabilities attached to that. Could I ask you your position in relation to that?
Well, we would be of the same position, that we don't want to see them used on an individual under the age of 18, or indeed any individual. There has been no uses yet of anti-spit guards on anyone under or on any juvenile or child. The difficulty is it's the behaviour and the behaviour of the individual which drive decision making around their use. And regrettably then, we felt it was important that it was still available in these, and they're pretty extreme circumstances where they're being used. I'd point out between the 8th and the 25th, we only used them on 15 occasions. And given the number of interactions, the number of arrests that we'll have conducted in that period, and these aren't 15 uses in a COVID-19 situation. These are more like public order assault type situations. So I think 15 uses shows that's a proportionate use of the anti-spit guards. But in the same time, we've had 31 spitting type assaults on Gardaí as well. And it seems now to be a daily feature of either reports of spitting against members of Garda Síochána, or indeed spitting at members of the public, including those working on our transport network, or indeed those working in shops as well. So regrettably, maybe it's just the nature of the coverage that this has got and the impact of COVID-19. This has become a more prevalent behaviour than it would have been 3-4 months ago.
We would absolutely agree that this is just, Gardaí shouldn't be put in that position. There shouldn't be that risk attaching to it. Two very small questions just to close that off, and then I'll be done. The authority has drafted a template for the recording of the use of split hoods with various indicators. And I just wanted to check, were you happy to use that template? And then secondly, are you happy to confirm that following the emergency period, split hoods will no longer be used?
Okay, I think we're content to do a review on the 1st of September, and then we can review the situation then. We don't envisage that we will be using this, as I've said already, as protective equipment going beyond that, but I'm not sure what exactly will be the scenario that we'll face on the 1st of September. But we did think it was important that we have a quick review then of their use and how they've been used, and what lessons then that can be formally learnt and applied then to our policy. Obviously, if there's something which occurs in between, then we will do that. I'm sorry, the other part of your question, sorry.
The template for recording.
Oh yeah. In respect to template, I think the vast majority of the fields we are content with. There are a number of the fields which are actually unique in terms of the information that we gather at the moment, and we need to seek some advice, but we can be in conversation offline with you in respect of that.
Okay. I just say again, I think the authority's position is we would not like to see these used beyond the emergency period, and we would hope that we get a chance to participate in any review that is being conducted.
Okay, yes. Yes, indeed, yes.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Commissioner. Before asking Judith Gillespie to take up other elements of this topic, I just thought I should say that it has never been the case that the authorities sought to have access to details of names and addresses of people who might have been directed by Gardaí to move or to return home, and who complied with that direction. The issue is simply that the actual fact of issuing a direction is a use of one of the powers, and it was the number of times that was used to give the Garda Síochána, to give the authorities and oversight body, to give the public themselves a sense of how compliant the general public is as a whole, as you have said, and as is generally evident. But it was never the case that we were suggesting that people's names and addresses needed to be taken or recorded in those circumstances. And just echoing this, Commissioner.
I wonder, would it be a useful point just to refer to the data that we have from the N7 yesterday? If the actual facts
I think it would be very helpful.
Yes. So yesterday we had a vehicle checkpoint located on the N7 close to Blackchurch, and we know that 11,454 vehicles passed through that checkpoint whilst we were there. And of particular interest, there were 6,618 cars and 1,513 vans. And of that, we would say there was 12 people given direction in effect to desist from that journey and return to their place of residence. And that would be, I would say, given the widest interpretation of the use of power 31A7. There were no arrests and no offences disclosed in respect of the health regulations. So that's illustrative, I believe, of the high degree of compliance that, in effect, we're on a motorway from 7 in the morning to 12 at night, and we're finding that level of compliance. We intend to do this again in a number of locations on Friday, and hopefully then we'll be able to provide you them with more detail in respect of these. Well, it'll be major roads or motorways in terms of compliance in respect of road users there. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. We'll have continuing discussions on this topic separately from this meeting, obviously. Judith.
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Yep. Can I join others in commending the response of the whole organisation to meeting the unprecedented challenges, Gardaí and Garda staff? Commissioner, can you just summarise the infrastructure, the specific infrastructure that you've put in place to coordinate and monitor and task the organisation's response during this period?
Do you want to take that? If I could look to John, because John's been very active in this field and has been leading the operational response. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Commissioner. At the outset, we set up a coordination centre. It's based here in Garda headquarters. It's 24/7, and it has been running since the weekend of the 12th of March, and that continues every day, and is a resource available to the entire organisation to deal with any questions or any issues that may be raised. And we have a daily meeting at 10 o'clock. I chair a daily briefing where we have all of the various sections of the organisation feed into that, and that provides us with the opportunity from a HR perspective in terms of absence management, in terms of procurement, in terms of equipment and what equipment is available to the organisation, from an IT, from a mobility, from an entire support perspective. We have legal, we have our internal communications, and on a daily basis we issue an internal communications out to the organisation. And just by way of information, I think it's in the pack there for you, we get about 13,000 reads of that on a daily basis, and that provides updates as the situation evolves and adapts. We provide live information to the entire organisation in relation to the latest thinking and understanding and the advices that are to be given to them. In parallel with that, the management team meet on a daily basis at 11 a.m. and we look at the daily activities from foot patrols to mobile patrols to community engagement to our checkpoints and what and how are they evolving. And with all the various different issues that we encounter on a daily basis are discussed, we get a common approach so that it's consistent right across the country. And as you can imagine, on an island, there's a whole variation, a whole variety of various different challenges that we face. But that's done on a daily basis. We've been meeting every day since the start of this Saturday and Sunday, looking at all of the various different changes and adapting our practices and our procedures in whatever way necessary. We look at the community engagement approach to ensure there's a consistency of thinking and understanding. Similarly, then the assistant commissioners have a daily briefing with their senior management team, and that flows down through the organisation. So we probably have three main ways of communicating the message. Just in summary, Judith, if I may, there's just three main ways of doing it. That's those series of meetings. We have daily instructions coming out of the COVID office, and we have a series of internal messages going direct to each member of the organisation on a daily basis.
Thanks very much. That's really good to hear, in particular regarding the internal communication and the efforts that you're taking to make sure the organisation is informed of what's going on. But I think a really good example of the way you have adjusted is the Operation Fuisive and the Garda response to domestic abuse, and it has had significant positive commentary in the media and indeed from support organisations in this space, and in particular the proactive way that you've gone about this and explaining what you're doing before you went public on it. So I'd just like to ask whoever you think is most appropriate to respond to this, what key messages would you want to give to those who are concerned about the rise in domestic abuse? Is there any particular information you would want to use this opportunity to get out to victims and to those who are concerned about potential domestic abuse going on and don't know what to do?
Well, if I could pass again over across to John, please. Well, thank you, Commissioner. I suppose the message that we want to give to the people in those situations is to be clear that we in Garda Síochána are here to support them, and you're not alone, you're not isolated, and we have put in dedicated resources in every Garda division right around the country with specific training and support to help people. But a key message to the victims of domestic abuse is reach out to Garda Síochána. Wherever you are, you're not alone. We have had a lot of communication and interaction as well with various other interest groups. And we're here to support you, and we're here to work with you right throughout this difficult time. There has been an increase across the country, and our clear message that we've tried to repeat in every opportunity that we can is you're not alone. Come to Garda Síochána, come to an interest group, and we will give you the support that we need in whatever way you need it.
And just building on that, are there any additional challenges that you have identified? For example, in rural areas or where there might be reduced availability of services due to the COVID-19 situation, and how are you dealing with those challenges?
Well, we have structured the organisation that we don't see a reduction in the availability of service at any stage. We're available 24/7 right around the entire country. At the outset, we changed our roster structure, and we moved it to a 12-hour 4-on, 4-off to ensure that we had maximum availability of our resources to meet the demand. So we don't envisage any reduction of our ability or in our ability to respond to a demand for service. We are looking at what we can do to amend and enhance the operation, and we do expect that there will be further developments in that over the next week as we evaluate how the operation has evolved. We will be making some adjustments to that, and expect that over the course of the next week we'll make some announcements in that regard.
An often related issue is the issue of child abuse, and I see that Childline are reporting their calls are up by 30%. Have you a concern about an increase in child abuse, and are there any special partnership arrangements that you can put in place to reach out to the most vulnerable in our society, namely children who are being abused within the home at the moment?
Yes, we continue, to do our work in that particular area, and our National Protective Service unit are in constant contact with all of the agencies involved in this area. From the outset, we are concerned and we are aware that that increased time spent in domestic situation leads to an increase in this area. So we have refocused and redoubled our efforts. And as I said at the outset, when we were looking at streamlining our resources, the one area we enhanced was our ability in the national unit from the centre here to provide that support to our local staff, but also to have an enhanced reach out to local communities and the various different groups that are working in this particular area. We're very concerned about, and again, we repeat the same message we repeated earlier on. We're here to help people, and we want people to contact An Garda Síochána in any circumstance that they're concerned about.
Okay, just final question. In this particular area, international experience points to rising elder abuse at this time, in particular because older people are cocooning, they have to get someone else to pick up their pension. There are all sorts of opportunities for financial abuse, neglect. So what particular steps are you taking to tackle that area of crime?
I think from the outset, one of the key messages that we have made is to the elderly and to the vulnerable, to develop that relationship with local Garda, local community policing units, local Garda stations. We purchased a number of particular cars, and we have dedicated resources working in local communities, reaching out directly to the elderly and to the vulnerable. And in many cases, we are fulfilling those roles that you talk about there, and that we have constantly messaged to that particular community, to the interest groups, working with local authorities, working with all of the various different groups, GA, other sport agencies who are helping these people. So there's a very comprehensive system in place to support the elderly and the vulnerable and those that are cocooning. So it's certainly not something that we have come across. We are very aware of it, but it's something that we discuss on a daily basis at all of our management meetings about that reach into that community in particular. It was one of the first areas that we put into our operational plan.
And I should commend you on the really excellent outreach work that has been done towards the isolated and the vulnerable. You mentioned the additional cars that had been procured, I think hired, as it happens, but that also brings me to the point of Chief's authorisation for drivers, and we discussed this in committee last week. Can you just explain the decision-making process around the change in the Chief's authorisation arrangements?
Yes, the Chief's authorisation has been reintroduced just for the purpose of these non-response mobiles. So it is restricted specifically to these new vehicles that we purchased or that we hired. If they're a non-response vehicle, they're to be used in that community engagement work for the elderly, for the vulnerable, for helping local communities in whatever way possible. But it is not an official transport that's utilised for a response to calls. And we have put in a particular governance structure around that, where the Commissioner in Roads Policing is monitoring it on a daily basis, and it will last for the period of this particular public health emergency, and at which stage we envisage then that it will revert to the previous policy. Okay,
and speaking of the particular emergency arrangements that have been put in place, we know that some of the new student officers were attested early before they had completed their training. Can you just give us some insight into what particular support supervision arrangements have been put in place for them, and also how you will meet the medium to longer term challenges when hopefully this crisis is over. And for them to complete their training is my question.
Yes, well, we expect that they will complete their training, albeit in a different method. I think again from the outset, when these people were deployed into the assisting phase, so they were not put out into any Garda station on their own. It was in that assisting phase, as is well known, as the organisation is accustomed to, where they are deployed with other resources and they assist them. We have tutor Gardaí in place to support them. We have sergeants assigned to them out in Garda stations, and we are working in terms of that experiential learning and that maintenance of a daily diary from a learning perspective. And we will be working through that with them, through the Garda College, but also through the local management in the districts where they are based. And we expect that will feed into the next phase of their training. So we don't see them suffering in any way from this experience. The college had to close down, as did all other colleges, but also we had a demand from a response perspective. So we feel that the action that has been taken by the organisation is a very measured approach, and is one where they are still getting the support and that training and that tutoring that is required to enable them to develop.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner, can I look ahead now to the forthcoming holiday weekend and ask you about Operation Connacht and on what learning has been distilled from the Easter operation that you can bring to bear over the next weekend?
Third, yeah. So why we've engaged in the scale of the operation we have is precisely from our learnings from the Easter weekend, that we were looking into a bank holiday weekend, and inevitably that would usually engage in a lot of people moving, a lot of people either moving to holiday homes, the infamous holiday homes, or moving towards caravan parks, or just day tripping to the coast, and in line with just the support to the restrictions that have been required of all of us, but also then enforcing the regulations. We have found that if you put a good strong presence on the trunk roads, on the motorways, then that's a great deterrence towards that movement, which we'd have seen in other years. So really, this the operation is one of deterrence, and it's also then obviously then one of engagement with people and education. We're not in any form of numbers game around enforcement, and if we find full compliance, then that'll have been success, because that'll also mean that society is still supporting the restrictions that have been placed on all of us to support the measures against COVID-19. But I think one of our sort of major learning points was just when you take the motorways and the trunk roads, you really do close down movement across the country. Easter was exceptionally quiet. I doubt if we're going to see such a low level of movement ever again, but we don't expect, we certainly are out there, make sure that we engage and educate and, I say, encourage, and lastly then enforce the legislation. Thank you.
I've just a couple more questions. I'm conscious of time, but we have noted, I think Debbie referred to this in her questions, the number of significant drug and firearms and cash seizures, and you deserve congratulations for that. But these have happened at Connacht checkpoints, so clearly there is an interface between Connacht and Operation Tara. Could you just give a little further explanation about that?
Well, it's a multifaceted nature of police work. Like we have put police and Garda members out there on the ground, and they are obviously engaging with whoever comes along. The thing about the night time and if you're out and about towards the late evening for some purpose, the amount of traffic, etc., on the road is very minimal. Those who are moving about do stand out and inevitably are stopped. We have put, I suppose, a concentration on our proactive work, but we have seen throughout the month of March the number of burglaries, domestic burglaries certainly, being committed has diminished significantly. And just, I think, the travelling criminal, those who would travel to look for opportunities around burglary or other crimes, they are being deterred because they are regularly being stopped. And I think that's had a significant prevention advantage, and it's been one of the spin-offs of running such large-scale operations. But obviously, all our members are aware of criminal intelligence. They know to check up on individuals, particularly those who have suspicions of, and we are using this in its widest policing sense in respect of organised crime, be it burglary or be it the movement of drugs, etc.
Okay, time is against me, but this is my last question. In the midst of a crisis, you can miss the longer term opportunities. So is there a system by which you're capturing the learning from the experience of the last few weeks and building on that good practice and the positive opportunities? For example, the great outreach work that you're doing now, you'd want to continue that into the longer term. The mobility, the use of the mobility devices, the home working opportunities, the remote learning opportunities, you know, these are things that you might want to build on longer term. So are you capturing all of that going forward?
Well, keeping a record of the various innovations that we've engaged in, and the things that you talk about in terms of distance learning and all remote working, and then the successes we've had both operationally and particularly in respect to community policing. Those are all things that we'll wish to develop further. I think what we also have to acknowledge is we've put the whole organisation very, very much on an operational footing. At some point, and a not too very distant future, we're going to have to just come back and slip down from an operational 6th gear to 5th gear and release people to start looking at training, start looking at the organisational development work, to look at, again, towards policing service for the future, and just then to re-establish some of the projects which we had ongoing, particularly those which were working towards policing service for the future. We have a priority around our student training, but also training for those engaged in protective services type detective work. So we can't keep going at this operational tempo indefinitely, or indeed for very much longer. And we lifted up this tempo in early in around probably the 16th of March, and we've been keeping going at it since. And there is a time limit for how long we can keep going at this. But as we've gone through and as we've been through this, we've definitely taken note of the various lessons, and also then the various innovations and refinements we need to work as an organisation going forward in a social distancing concept.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other questions from other colleagues on the authority? Valerie.
Unmute. Good afternoon, Commissioner. I want to add to my colleagues' congratulations on all the good work that's been done by the entire organisation. I think it's appreciated by everybody. It's very, very challenging times, a whole new situation, and I think a lot could have happened and hasn't happened, were it not for the good work of the Guardian staff. I wanted to ask a question, briefly enough really, about the maintenance of social distancing and your policy on PPE in that regard. I've observed myself, obviously, with checkpoints and that, guards being very careful about social distancing, but I also appreciate that it mightn't always be possible. Members of the public might inadvertently not respect the distancing. And also, I suppose we've all seen media reports of Gardaí visiting people in their homes, delivering medicines to vulnerable people, etc. So what can you tell us to sort of give us assurance that Garda and staff themselves are protected, but also that they're not acting as vectors, and that the public can be assured and not be afraid if a guard calls to their door or if comes close to them?
Okay, thank you. I'll just pass over to Joe here in 1 second, but what I would say that these have been exceptionally challenging times, and I know we are acting in support of the main effort, which is obviously by the HSE and the Department of Health. But some of the situations that members have had to deal with out in the ground have been exceptionally difficult, and trying to support families in this very fraught time, particularly those families who have tragically lost loved ones, has been a considerable weight and has had an emotional impact on the organisation. That goes without saying. In the end, policing is also very much human interaction type business. You can't really do it remotely. We have to bring people to stations, we have to brief them, they have to go out on patrol, they have to interact with the public. So we have been very conscious of that right from the start. There's a whole series of measures that we've put in terms of just physical social distancing in the workplace, and even going to 4 shifts was part of that.
Yeah.
In terms of not having crossovers, finding alternative accommodation, sourcing new vehicles, but also then the supply of PPE. And we were very fast out of the blocks in terms of securing our own PPE for the organisation. And now there's a whole distribution chain in place. But I'll pass to Joe, because it's been very specific work done in terms of health and safety by Joe's group that meet daily. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, health and safety of our members and indeed the public at large is at the heart of everything we've done through this. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Health and safety is at the heart of what we're doing in terms of looking after members, but also looking after interactions with the public at large. Our Chief Medical Officer and indeed the people with responsibility for health and safety are engaged on a teleconference every morning at 9, and indeed the Chief Medical Officer follows through with a variety of teleconferences through the course of the day. But in looking at the deployment of PPE, we've looked and encouraged our chiefs to take note of advice and guidance provided by the Chief Medical Officer, with risk management and risk assessment at the heart of our decisions. So there's been some commentary about the outward use of facial protections, for example, on checkpoints, and we have specific advice provided around that, and that's probably where a lot of the public will see our interaction. But in terms of visits, in terms of our engagement within our stations, we've made some physical changes. So there are protections being provided in interview rooms and in custody areas. There is guidance provided around how our members should travel around in cars. There's guidance around how people should even interact at those checkpoints, and that's a continuing process. It's a matter that we keep under daily review to see whether the scientific advice has changed, and on foot of that we'll take away lessons from that area. So some specific work the Commissioner referenced at our private meeting that we're looking at, some issues associated with the equipment that we use and whether we need to do some further thinking around that. So whether that's related to the physical apparel that we have on. But we're equally looking at our engagement with those who have to come into our stations, so solicitors, for example, and in their interaction with our clients and stations at large. So it's as I said, it's a daily consideration. It's a matter that we take very seriously. It's discussed by the most senior managers in the organisation on a daily basis, and it's a matter that we keep under constant and absolute review.
Okay, and can I ask you, Joe, and it's really in terms of assuring the members of the public, if a Garda is calling, or one of the community cars is calling to a person who's cocooning and say giving a package or delivering something personally, what protections are put in place both for the guard and for the person they're visiting?
Well, firstly, they shouldn't be turning up unannounced, and there would obviously be engagement in advance of arrival. So we start from there. Obviously, the individuals, if they're delivering something, will have taken care in terms of how they've managed and received that, in terms of wearing gloves, for example, in terms of how it's been left. And certainly I've seen personal experience of individuals where they're approaching with care to the door. They're leaving materials where it's appropriate at the front of the door, rather than necessarily immediately going into the
Are you confident that's happening? Because I have heard of one case myself where, firstly, the person didn't realise when the pharmacy offered to deliver that it was going to be a Garda coming, and they were concerned they'd wasted valuable resources. But also the Garda handed the object to the person, and she was a little bit concerned.
Well, I can only talk to personal experience.
Yeah, I know. I'm only saying
and the guidance,
example.
sure. Yeah, and guidance that we've provided to people around how they should interact and how they should trust the individuals concerned. I think what we have seen broadly is that the community are trusting us hugely, and they're turning to us in very much, almost in the first instance, about the level of trust that they have with us. And that's reflective, I guess, of the types of community engagement initiatives that we've referenced earlier on. As I said, from a health and safety point of view, we've provided guidance on how those interactions should take place. And it's a matter that we monitor and continue to look at all of the time.
Okay. Are there any plans to test Gardaí who are out in the community and who may have come
test as in test for
COVID?
Test for COVID-19. No more than the community at large. I mean, we're guided by the decisions made by NFET and by the HSE around who should be tested, and we follow through on those particular procedures. So it stands at the moment. There's a set criteria for who should be tested. We know that in the last few weeks that priority has been given to those in nursing home care, and that's where the volume of testing has happened. But we also know that NFET are likely to reassess that. Whether priority testing is something that we will see for ourselves, it's not known at the moment. We'll listen to the advice of our Chief Medical Officer and to Dr. Houlihan and the rest of NFET on that issue.
Okay, I think that's very reassuring, Joe. Thank you for that. And one final question. As an organisation, have you faced difficulties in terms of members having childcare responsibilities that are difficult to manage at the moment?
I think no more than any employer, we've had those situations. We're guided by the advice provided to us by the Department of Public Expenditure around how we should address and deal with those, and we operate within the procedures that they've put in place around that. And then obviously we've looked at this on an individual level too, but primarily guided by the procedures that and the guidelines that are given to us by the Department of Public Expenditure on this issue.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And once again, I think on behalf of my colleagues as well, I think we'd like to extend very warm appreciation to all the members. And I think if there is an upside to this terrible pandemic that's affected us, it is that level of community engagement that's being established at the moment. And as Judith referred to, I think we all hope that elements of that can be perpetuated into the future. So thank you.
Thanks, Valerie.
Thank you, Valerie. Unless there are any other, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I know we're up against it in terms of time, so it's a very quick question. And it really goes to this point, Commissioner, that you've made on several occasions and that we've, I think, fully accepted, which is that the relative success of the operation to date and the clear emphasis on encouraging people to comply as opposed to enforcement. There was an incident last week in Dublin where Debenhams workers who were protesting were, I think, moved along by the guards and encouraged to go home or told to go home. I'm not sure which was the correct description. That matter was then raised by a number of members in the Dáil, and I understand today that a similar incident took place in Cork, where names and addresses of Debenhams workers were taken by guards. I think on both occasions it's true to say that the workers were maintaining social distance, and I'm just wondering, do you have any comment to make about the Garda policing of such protests in the current context? I think, yeah.
Okay. I'm very conscious just of the difficult position that we're put in respect of protests, be it of whatever nature, because within the regulations, that is not seen as an essential reason why one would be beyond your place of residence or your home. I'm not aware of the circumstances there today. They must have, maybe that may have commenced whilst we've been here. And I have written separately in respect of last week's events in respect of the protest at Debenhams, in which case I believe in that circumstances those who were protesting, as you say, were social distancing in that they were 2 meters apart, but nevertheless to engage in a protest, it lies outside the scope of the regulations for a reasonable excuse as to why you should be beyond your household. And so in other situations, we've been in a position where we're conducting investigations. I'm sorry, I can't comment on today's scenario, but my understanding of the regulations is the taking of names and addresses is after an escalation type process, but I can't comment any further on that.
Thank you. There were two brief questions that I had just to bring matters to a conclusion, Commissioner. The first is to ask if you've identified any significant differences between the experience in an urban and a rural context, either in terms of the policing or in terms of the circumstances of the Operation Fuishiv, whether there's a greater degree of vulnerability in either of those circumstances. And perhaps not unrelated to that, I wonder whether there is any structured role for the chairs of joint policing committees in some of the local policing decision-making or even fora that engage with these issues on a divisional level.
Thank you. My understanding is that the response is being led at a local level by the councils, and therefore that necessarily engages individuals who would be normally involved with the JPCs, and we would either have superintendents or chief superintendents who would be representing us on those bodies. So there is a coordination at a local level for each council, and obviously we play our full part in terms of just, you know, passing on the learning and the knowledge we have of those who might need help, but also then obviously giving practical assistance where we can as well. I think probably the experience has been that the rural areas were very fast out of the blocks in terms of just Gardaí who were located in rural locations had a good sort of intimate knowledge of those who might need help, and then through that then found others as well. But that has been followed up then, particularly when we got to the 15th of March or 16th of March, we were able to follow through very much then in the urban areas because our community policing was immediately bolstered, and we had a period probably from the 8th up until the 20th in which we were only doing this sort of community engagement type function, and that put us really on the front foot in terms of identifying individuals. So we used that time well. It was used, I think, particularly well in the rural areas, and there's been a lot of personal contact engaged in face-to-face meeting with people. So that set a good foundation for which other agencies then have been able to build on as well. So it's been a good, I think that's been a good overall success story in terms of the societal governmental response and NGO response, and also then others have played their part, be it these sporting clubs or other voluntary bodies, and inevitably that has engaged then personnel from the JPC. So I think there was good decision making and good central direction provided there from central government.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think that brings us to the end. We're beyond our scheduled time, and thank you for your forbearance and for your attention and attendance. I think this has been an important opportunity to have this discussion in public, as meetings, these meetings always are, perhaps particularly so on this occasion. Once again, reiterating the point we made in terms of the work that everybody in the Garda Síochána is engaged in at the moment, wishing you and the colleagues well in the busy days ahead. And we will, of course, be continuing to engage with you and with your colleagues on a day-to-day basis, hour-to-hour basis sometimes. And I want to express, as I have done before, but again, to take this opportunity of expressing appreciation for the frequency and the directness of the engagement that you and I have been able to have over recent weeks in relation to this. It's been very welcome and very helpful. So thank you very much indeed to everybody, and this meeting has now concluded. Thank you.
Thank you.